Imagine looking at a global economy that feels, honestly, like it's fracturing in real time.
Yeah, it really does.
Right. We are talking about chaotic trade wars, wildly unpredictable tariffs, massive supply chain disruption.
Just a mess everywhere you look.
Exactly. And looking at all of that chaos, you decide that right now is the absolute best time to pour record-breaking investments into a mid-sized Canadian city.
Which sounds completely counterintuitive.
It really does. But yesterday, we actually found out exactly why international investors are doing just that. So welcome to this deep dive, brought to you by Business Link Media Group.
Glad to be here.
So we spent yesterday morning, April 9th, 2026, completely immersed in the Niagara Industrial Association's annual general meeting.
Yeah, at the Stone Mill Inn in St. Catharines.
Right. And I have to say, the atmosphere in that room was just fascinating.
It was. I mean, you had hundreds of local business leaders, public officials, industry stakeholders, all just networking over coffee.
Yeah. Grabbing some light refreshments, shaking hands.
Exactly. And on the surface, it had that hum of a really successful corporate gathering. But beneath all that, you could definitely detect this profound underlying tension.
Oh, absolutely.
People were celebrating an incredible local economic boom, but simultaneously grappling with this just suffocating cloud of international unpredictability.
I was trying to pinpoint a way to describe that exact feeling. And honestly, it felt like watching a group of highly skilled acrobats doing a flawless routine on a tightrope.
That is a great analogy.
Right, because they are moving forward, they are making money, but they're just hyper-aware of these massive, unpredictable crosswinds threatening to blow them off the line at any second.
Yeah, one bad gust and it's over.
Exactly. So our mission today is to unpack what business leaders actually discussed inside that room to help you navigate your own industry's unpredictable shifts.
Because the contrast there was just staggering.
It really was. To understand the tension, we have to look at what St. Catharines Mayor Mat Siscoe presented right at the start. He outlined a level of local growth that frankly caught me off guard.
Yeah, the metrics for St. Catharines are phenomenal right now. I mean, the city has surpassed 70,000 in employment.
Wow.
And over the past year, they've seen the creation of roughly 600 new independent businesses.
That's huge.
It is. And a massive driver of that momentum is the industrial sector. They have more than 300 manufacturing businesses operating just in St. Catharines alone.
But the moment he put those triumphant numbers on the board, he, immediately pivoted to the external threats.
Right, he had to.
The tariffs, the skyrocketing operational costs, the sudden unreliability of these long-standing trade agreements.
It's the crosswinds you mentioned.
Exactly. And what I want to drill down into are the defensive strategies the city is using to protect that growth. Like the mayor highlighted their involvement in the Great Lakes St. Lawrence City's initiative.
Yeah, that's a big one.
But I mean, how much actual power does an initiative like that hold?
It holds a lot of lobbying power, actually. It's not just some ceremonial networking group. It is a massive binational coalition of mayors representing millions of citizens on both sides of the border.
So they have real leverage.
Exactly. When Washington or Ottawa contemplates policies that affect the Great Lakes supply chain, this initiative presents a unified, bipartisan front. It's a vital tool for smoothing out the friction of international trade.
Okay, but here's where I see a massive, glaring contradiction.
Okay, lay it on me.
So the mayor champions this cross-border collaboration to keep trade flowing, right?
Right.
But in the exact same presentation, he champions the city's Canada First procurement approach. They are actively rewriting their own purchasing rules to prioritize local suppliers.
Yeah, I see where you're going with this.
I mean, is it a contradiction? You cannot simultaneously play the protectionist at home while demanding free trade abroad. How do businesses navigate wanting to buy local but having to sell global?
It does sound paradoxical, I'll give you that. But the mechanics of municipal procurement actually allow for this kind of strategic duality.
How so?
Well, trade agreements like CUSMA have specific monetary thresholds. Municipalities can structure their public contracts, whether it's buying fleet vehicles or contracting construction or even office supplies, in ways that legally favor domestic bidders below certain dollar amounts.
Oh, I see. So there's a loophole of sorts.
Not really a loophole, just the rules of the game. They use targeted scoring systems that weigh community economic impact alongside the raw price.
But I still struggle to see how a business deals with the mixed messaging. They're told to buy local, but they desperately need to sell global to scale. It feels like driving with one foot slammed on the gas and the other on the brake.
Think of it less like driving and more like building a foundation. A Canada First procurement strategy isn't about isolating St. Catharines. It is about guaranteeing a baseline of stable revenue for the local manufacturing base.
So it's a safety net.
Exactly. If a local machine shop secures a multi-year municipal contract, they suddenly have a guaranteed cash flow. That financial stability is the leverage they need to take risks in the global market.
Ah, so they aren't going to go bankrupt if a foreign government suddenly slaps a 15% tariff on their exports next Tuesday.
Precisely. By strengthening the local base, that's the what, they build the resilience to handle volatile international trade, which is the why. They negotiate from a position of security.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. And this tension between local security and global chaos, it really perfectly set up the keynote address.
Oh, Brock Dickinson.
Yes, Brock Dickinson, the vice chair of Invest Ontario. He took the stage and gave this chaotic era a label that I will probably never forget. He called it the Age of Monsters.
It is such an incredibly evocative, almost philosophical framing of macroeconomic trends.
It really is.
His core theme is that we are living through a profound historical transition. The traditional systems, the established rules of globalized free trade that companies relied on for the last 40 years, they're rapidly fading.
Right. I was thinking about it like a massive glitchy software update.
Oh, that's good.
Like society has deleted the old operating system, but the new one is only 40% downloaded. So nothing is communicating properly. The supply chains are broken, geopolitical alliances are throwing up error codes, and the business community is just staring at a loading screen.
That is a highly accurate way to visualize it. And in that gap between the deleted old world and the unwritten new world, that is exactly where the monsters breed.
So what are these monsters specifically?
Things like rising tariffs, reduced cooperation between traditional trade partners, just record economic uncertainty. Supply chains that used to be a boring guarantee are suddenly weaponized for political leverage.
Yeah, trade agreements that took decades to build are being torn up overnight via, like, social media posts.
Exactly. The unpredictability is just paralyzing for standard corporate forecasting.
Which brings us to the plot twist Dickinson dropped on the room.
The FDI numbers.
Yes. Despite the glitching system, despite the monsters of rising tariffs, he pointed out that Canada saw record-breaking foreign direct investment in 2025.
It's wild, isn't it?
It's a total head-scratcher.
Oh.
I need you to explain the logic here. If the global market is such a volatile monster right now, why is foreign money pouring into Canada at record levels? Shouldn't investors be hiding their cash under the mattress?
You'd think so, but capital doesn't inherently flee from volatility. It seeks out safe harbors within the storm.
Yeah.
When the global landscape is defined by political upheaval and arbitrary trade wars, stability becomes the most valuable commodity on the planet. Capital craves a safe harbor.
So the very chaos of the international market creates a massive premium on predictable environments.
Exactly. When a foreign conglomerate looks at the Niagara region, they don't just see a location on a map. They see the NIA, they see local government, educational institutions, and private manufacturers actively collaborating.
They see a system that actually works.
Right. They see predictable energy grids and a stable rule of law. In the age of monsters, foreign investment is running away from unpredictable jurisdictions and parking itself in environments where the foundational rules of business are still respected. The monsters are literally driving the capital right to our doorstep.
That is fascinating.
Yeah.
But okay, if local stability is acting as a magnet for foreign capital, how does a mid-sized manufacturer actually capture that value on the factory floor?
Well, the conversation at the AGM naturally shifted to exactly that. Dickinson outlined several megatrends dictating the current survival playbook.
Right. Pivots, policy, and people. Let's start with the pivots. He brought up demographic shifts, but we didn't really get to go deep into how human demographics alter a factory's operations.
So we are witnessing an unprecedented aging of the global workforce. As the baby boomer generation retires, companies aren't just losing bodies, they are losing decades of highly specialized institutional knowledge.
So they literally don't have the hands to do the work.
Exactly. This demographic cliff means a literal shortage of human hands to operate traditional production lines. Consequently, companies are being forced to pivot heavily into automation and smart manufacturing.
So they aren't automating just to cut costs. They're automating because the labor pools simply cannot sustain the old manual models anymore.
Bingo. Combine that with the reshoring of manufacturing to North America, and the sudden explosion of enormous multi-billion-dollar projects in defense, mining, and clean energy.
Which leads to that industrial pivot example he gave.
The automotive suppliers.
Yes. For 50 years, their entire business model was stamping metal parts for car engines. But now, they are looking at a volatile automotive sector and deciding to take those exact same skills, the precision machining, the large-scale assembly logistics, and applying them to building components for armored vehicles or renewable energy grids.
It's the ultimate Darwinian response to a shifting ecosystem. You adapt your core competencies to the emerging environment, or you perish.
Okay, let's talk about the most controversial adaptation strategy discussed yesterday. The case study of the Canadian aluminum manufacturer.
Ah, yes. This is a complex one.
Very. We heard that this company is actively exploring building a new facility in the United States, specifically to bypass U.S. tariffs and serve the American market directly.
Right.
I have to play devil's advocate here. If I am a Canadian worker and my boss announces we are building a multi-million-dollar factory in Ohio or Michigan to jump a tariff wall, I am assuming my job is gone.
Yeah, it sounds like abandoning ship to the untrained ear.
Exactly.
Yeah.
How does moving production across the border benefit the Canadian operation in any way?
I completely understand why that triggers alarm bells. Historically, offshoring was about finding cheaper labor at the expense of domestic jobs, but the modern operational model is entirely different.
How so?
Let's look at the corporate balance sheet. If a 25% tariff gets slapped on their aluminum exports, their product becomes instantly uncompetitive in the U.S. market.
Right. Their American sales effectively drop to zero.
And when that revenue vanishes, the Canadian plant immediately begins bleeding capital. They are forced to halt expansion, cut back on maintenance, and ultimately lay off the very Canadian workers they were trying to protect.
So doing nothing means the local jobs die anyway.
But look at what happens when they build the facility inside the U.S. They bypass the tariff entirely, they capture American policy incentives, and most importantly, they secure their market share.
So they keep the revenue flowing.
Think of it like a financial root system. You grow a branch over the fence into the neighbor's yard to tap into their water supply. The revenue generated by that American facility flows back to the main trunk, the Canadian headquarters.
Oh, wow. So that repatriated capital is what actually funds the high-level engineering roles, the research and development, and retaining the local workforce back in Canada.
Exactly. The U.S. plant is essentially a financial shield protecting the home base. It secures their overall financial health, ensuring the company survives to innovate at home.
That is a masterful way of playing by the rules of the new protectionist monster.
It really is.
And companies aren't having to make these massive pivots entirely on their own. We heard a lot about government tools supporting this, specifically the new federal budget measures.
The productivity-focused tax deduction.
Yes. But again, a tax deduction sounds great on paper, but how does it mechanically alter a CEO's decision to buy a new robotic arm?
It changes the calculus of risk. Ordinarily, if a manufacturer buys a $5 million piece of advanced machinery, the tax code forces them to depreciate that asset over a decade or more.
So they take on a massive upfront financial burden, but the tax relief trickles in slowly.
Right, which makes them hesitant to innovate, especially in a volatile economy where they might need that cash on hand. The productivity-focused deduction allows for accelerated depreciation.
Meaning they write it off faster.
It effectively allows the business to write off a massive portion of that investment immediately. By drastically reducing the upfront tax burden, the government is functionally discounting the cost of innovation. It encourages companies to reinvest in equipment today rather than waiting for the economy to stabilize.
That is brilliant in theory. But this brings us to the harsh reality check provided by Jordan Sherlock, the executive director of the NIA.
Yeah, he brought it all back down to earth.
He really did. He made it abundantly clear that none of this growth happens without workers, the human element. You can buy the most advanced, tax-deductible robotic assembly system on the planet, but if you do not have a human being who knows how to program it, maintain it, and troubleshoot it, you just bought a $5 million paperweight.
The workforce shortage remains the most critical bottleneck for industrial growth. And as Sherlock pointed out, the challenge is compounding. It is not just a sheer lack of applicants. It is a severe mismatch of skill sets.
Because the jobs themselves are mutating. The worker who spent 20 years operating a manual lathe is suddenly looking at a computerized, multi-axis machining center designed for aerospace components.
The technical requirements have shifted underneath their feet.
This is why the NIA's approach to the labor crisis is so compelling. They aren't just complaining about a lack of talent, they are engineering a pipeline. Sherlock highlighted their partnerships with local education, specifically Brock University and Niagara College.
And what's great is the mechanical integration there. They aren't just showing up to job fairs.
Exactly. The NIA is working with the educators to co-design the curriculum. They are telling the colleges exactly what software the new machines use, what specific safety protocols the defense sector requires.
Ensuring that when a student graduates, they possess the exact, highly specialized skills the factory floor is desperate for that day. It is a proactive, localized solution to a global megatrend.
And their ability to bridge these different worlds is clearly gaining recognition. Sherlock proudly mentioned the NIA's recent nomination for an Agri-Business Achievement Award.
Which is proof of their expanding influence.
It speaks volumes. An Industrial Manufacturing Association getting nominated for an agricultural award proves their agility. They are successfully taking the advanced manufacturing capabilities of their members and applying them to the automation needs of the local greenhouse and farming sectors.
It perfectly encapsulates the entire survival strategy we've been discussing, adapting core skills to capture new, emerging opportunities right in your own backyard.
Which leads perfectly into our ultimate takeaway from the Stone Mill Inn yesterday.
The final push from Brock Dickinson's Keynote.
Yes. As we look at the age of monsters, his ultimate push was a call to radically rethink where our closest allies actually are. He argued heavily for strengthening interprovincial connections within Canada, rather than just relying on international exports.
Because for decades, the default metric for a successful business was international export. If you weren't selling overseas, you weren't growing. But when the international borders are increasingly fraught with political risk and supply chains are constantly threatened, Dickinson argues that the safest, most lucrative growth opportunity might be the province right next door.
We have this massive, stable domestic market that we routinely overlook because we are so culturally fixated on global trade. So if you are a listener running a mid-sized tech firm, a regional retail chain, or even managing a healthcare facility, the mechanics of this age of monsters apply directly to you.
Absolutely. You cannot control the macroeconomic headwinds. You cannot force a foreign government to lower a tariff or fix a broken supply chain.
But you have absolute control over your local collaborations. You control your willingness to build strategic partnerships within your own municipality or province. And you control your readiness to pivot the existing skills your team already possesses into emerging sectors.
The future belongs to those who collaborate and adapt. That was the cautious optimism that closed the event.
Exactly. We are all out on that tightrope, feeling the same unpredictable crosswinds. The old rules of your industry are fading, and the new ones aren't written yet.
It's a chaotic time.
It is. So as you process everything we pulled from the AGM yesterday, we want to leave you with this final thought to ponder on your own. What is the specific monster currently keeping you up at night in your own industry, and how could you reframe it as your greatest strategic opportunity?